I came back from the funeral, my heart still racing. I was about to tell my parents and my siblings that he had secretly left me 2 farms and a mansion in Los Angeles. But I stopped at the door. I heard their voices on the other side. What they said next made my blood run cold. My hand was still on the doorknob when I heard my mother say my name, not the way you say someone's name when you're calling them, the way you say it when you're talking about them, when you think they can't hear. There's a difference, a flatness, a lack of performance. I'd driven 2 hours back from the funeral, my uncle's funeral, the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was worth something. And I was about to walk into my parents' living room and tell them the impossible thing that had happened, the thing that was still folded in my purse, the papers I'd signed in a lawyer's office while everyone else was at the reception eating finger sandwiches and pretending to grieve. 2 farms, one in Bakersfield, one outside Fresno, and a mansion in Los Angeles. A mansion, me. But I didn't open the door. I stood there with my hand frozen on the brass knob that my mother polished every Sunday, and I listened. "She'll give it to us," my mother was saying. "You know how she is. She can't say no to anything. Remember when she let Marcus borrow her car for 6 months?" "Borrow," my brother said and laughed. I could picture him, feet up on the coffee table, beer in hand, that smirk he'd perfected by the time he was 12. The smirk that said he knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care. "The point is," my mother continued, "Margaret doesn't have the spine for property like that. She wouldn't know what to do with it. She'll want help. She'll need us to manage it for her." Mom's right. That was Sarah, my sister. "Margaret can barely manage her apartment. You've seen how she lives." "She works 2 jobs, my father said. His voice was quieter than the others, almost reluctant. "She's tired." Exactly, my mother's voice had that satisfied tone, the one she used when she was winning an argument. "Too tired to handle a mansion and 2 farms. We'll help her sell them. Take a reasonable cut for our trouble. She'll be grateful." "What about Uncle Henry's wishes?" my father asked. "He left it to her for a reason." There was a pause, then Marcus again. "Dad, Uncle Henry was senile. Everyone knew it. The fact that he left everything to Margaret instead of his actual family proves it." "We are his actual family," Sarah said. "Margaret was just his project, his charity case." "Remember how he'd always take her side?" Marcus said. "Even when she was being unreasonable. He'd act like she was special or something. It was pathetic, honestly." "He felt sorry for her, Yimbakar," my mother said. "We all did, but feeling sorry for someone doesn't mean you should leave them your entire estate. That kind of money would ruin her." "Plus," Marcus added, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "she owes me. That car thing, I had expenses. She knows that. And remember when I needed a place to crash for a few months? She practically begged me to leave by the end. Ungrateful." "You stayed for 11 months, my father said. "And you didn't pay rent." "Dad, that's not the point. The point is Margaret's always been the weak link in this family, and now she's accidentally gotten her hands on something she can't handle. We need to step in, for her own good." "I've already talked to a lawyer, Asahant," my mother said. "A friend of Carol's husband. He says if we can prove diminished capacity." I didn't hear the rest. I was already walking back to my car, my heels sinking into the soft grass of my parents' lawn, the grass my father had watered every morning for 30 years, even during droughts, even when the neighbors complained. I got into my car, I put my hands on the steering wheel, and I sat there, in the driveway of the house where I grew up, and I felt something inside me shift, not break. I'd done enough breaking. This was different. This was the sound of a door closing. A door I'd been holding open for 34 years, waiting for people to walk through it and love me the way I needed to be loved. They weren't coming. They never had been. I should tell you about Uncle Henry. He wasn't actually my uncle. He was my father's uncle technically, my great-uncle. But great-uncle is too many syllables for a child, so he was always just Uncle Henry to me and my siblings. Except he wasn't really Uncle Henry to them. They didn't go to his house on summer Sundays the way I did. They didn't sit on his porch and drink lemonade while he told stories about the Korean War and the woman he almost married in Busan and the farm in Bakersfield that his father had started with nothing but 12 acres and a dream. They thought he was weird. My mother called him eccentric, which was her polite word for crazy. My father respected him in that distant, uncomfortable way men respect the family members they don't understand. And my siblings, well, Marcus once asked me why I wasted my weekends with that old man when I could be doing something useful. I didn't have an answer that would satisfy him. I didn't know how to explain that Uncle Henry was the only person in my entire family who saw me. Not Margaret the forgettable, not Margaret the middle child who nobody noticed at family dinners, not Margaret who was fine and doing okay, and Margaret, she just goes along with things. When Uncle Henry looked at me, he saw a whole person, with thoughts and dreams, and a stubborn streak he said reminded him of his mother. He saw someone worth paying attention to. He was 87 when he died. A stroke, they said. Quick and painless. He was in his garden, tending to the tomatoes he'd been growing for 60 years, and then he wasn't. The neighbor found him. She said he looked peaceful. I cried for 3 days straight. Not at the funeral, though. I didn't cry at the funeral. Because my family was there, and I'd learned a long time ago that crying in front of them was a mistake. Tears in my family were treated as evidence. Evidence that you were too emotional, too sensitive, too much. Evidence that you couldn't handle things. So I sat in the church with my hands folded in my lap, and I listened to the priest say things about a man he'd clearly never met. And I felt the tears pressing against the backs of my eyes, like water against a dam. I held them there. I'd had 34 years of practice. After the service, everyone went to the reception at my parents' house, but I didn't go. I'd gotten a call from a lawyer the night before, Harold Easton, who said he'd been Uncle Henry's attorney for 40 years, asking me to come to his office at 2 p.m. the day of the funeral. He said it was important. He said it couldn't wait. I didn't tell anyone. I'm still not sure why. Maybe I knew somehow that whatever was about to happen needed to happen in private. Maybe I was just tired of sharing every piece of my life with people who didn't care about it. Harold Easton's office was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Pasadena. It had that old money feeling. Dark wood, leather chairs, the smell of paper and dust and time. Harold himself was about 70, with kind eyes behind thick glasses and a handshake that was surprisingly firm. "Miss Mitchell," he said, "thank you for coming. I know this is a difficult day." "It is," I said, "but you said it was important." "It is." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee?" "I'm fine." He nodded, then sat down behind his desk and opened a folder. "I'll get straight to the point, Miss Mitchell. Your uncle, Henry Chen, updated his will 6 months ago. He came to me personally. He was very specific about what he wanted." He slid a piece of paper across the desk to me. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. 2 farms, 1 in Bakersfield, 1 outside Fresno, total acreage, 412, both operational, both profitable, and a property in Los Angeles, a mansion. The word was right there on the page, mansion. "There must be a mistake," I said. "There's no mistake." Harold's voice was gentle. "Henry was very clear. He wanted everything to go to you, Margaret. He said—" Harold paused, consulting his notes. He said, "She's the only one who ever listened. The only one who cared about the stories more than the land. That's how I know she'll take care of it." I couldn't speak. "He also left you a letter," Harold said. "He asked me to give it to you after you'd had a moment to process." He handed me an envelope. My name was written on the front in Uncle Henry's shaky handwriting. I pressed it to my chest. "How much is it worth?" I asked. My voice came out as a whisper. "All of it?" Harold hesitated. "At current market value, conservatively, around $18 million. The room tilted. I'd always thought of myself as invisible, not in a self-pitying way, in a factual way, like how the sky is blue and water is wet, and Margaret Mitchell is the kind of person nobody notices. It was just a truth about the world. I was the middle child. Sarah was the oldest, smart, driven, the one who went to law school and married a doctor and had 2 perfect children in her perfect house in her perfect suburb. Marcus was the youngest, the golden boy, the one who could charm his way out of anything, the one my mother still called my baby, even though he was 31 and had never held a job longer than 8 months. And then there was me, Margaret, the one in the middle, the one who filled the space between their light. I had a job, 2 jobs, actually. I worked as an administrative assistant at a small insurance company during the day. and 3 nights a week I waitressed at a restaurant in Glendale. I had an apartment, a studio, 800 square feet, in a building that always smelled vaguely of mold no matter how much I cleaned. I had a life. It just wasn't a life anyone seemed interested in. When I was 12, I asked my mother why she never came to my school plays. "You're not the star," she said. "You're just in the chorus. I'll come when you have a real part." I never got a real part. I wasn't talented enough. But I kept trying, year after year, because I thought maybe if I just worked a little harder, practiced a little longer, became a little better, maybe then she'd come. She never did. When I was 23, I graduated from college, bachelor's degree in English, from a state school I'd paid for myself through scholarships and part-time jobs. My parents came to the ceremony. They sat in the back and left immediately afterward because Sarah had a dinner party they needed to attend. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," my mother said, hugging me quickly. "This is a big accomplishment." Then she was gone. When I was 28, I got engaged. His name was David. He was kind and steady, and he loved me in that uncomplicated way that felt like coming home. I thought maybe this was it, the beginning of a life that would be my own, separate from the family that had never quite known what to do with me. My mother offered to help plan the wedding. She took over completely. Everything I wanted got quietly overruled. The venue I loved was too cheap. The dress I picked was unflattering. The flowers I'd dreamed of were tacky. "You'll thank me later," she kept saying. "You don't know what you're doing. You've never done this before." The wedding never happened. David called it off 3 months before the date. He said I'd changed. He said I'd become someone he didn't recognize. Anxious, people-pleasing, constantly seeking approval from people who would never give it. "I love you," he said, "but I can't marry someone who doesn't know who she is." I couldn't argue with him. He was right. The drive back to my parents' house after seeing Harold Easton was supposed to be triumphant. I had imagined it 100 times in the 3 hours since I'd left his office. I'd walk through that front door, the door with the brass knob my mother polished every Sunday, and I'd gather everyone in the living room, and I'd tell them what Uncle Henry had done. I'd watch their faces change. I'd see, for once, something other than dismissal when they looked at me. Maybe I thought the money would finally make me visible. Maybe I thought it would prove I was worth something. Maybe I was still, at 34, trying to get my mother to come to my school play. But I didn't walk through that door. I stood outside it, and I heard what they really thought of me. And I understood, finally, completely, irrevocably, that no amount of money would ever change how they saw me. I was Margaret, the weak link, the charity case, the one who couldn't say no, couldn't stand up for herself, couldn't handle anything important, the one they would take from without a second thought. I sat in my car for a long time. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and pink, the colors bleeding into each other like watercolors. It was beautiful. I'd forgotten that things could be beautiful. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Where are you? The reception is almost over. Very rude of you to miss it." I didn't respond. I just sat there, watching the sky change colors, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The grief for Uncle Henry, the anger at my family, the sadness for the girl I'd been, the one who'd spent her whole life waiting to be seen, waiting to be loved, waiting for something that was never coming. I cried. Not the polite, quiet tears I'd perfected over the years. Real crying, ugly crying, the kind that makes your whole body shake, that leaves you gasping for air, that empties you out completely. When it was over, I felt lighter, hollowed out but lighter. I dried my face, I started the car, and I drove back to my apartment, my small, moldy 800-square-foot apartment, and I closed the door behind me and sat down on my bed and opened Uncle Henry's letter. "Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope it was peaceful. I hope I was in my garden. I hope the tomatoes were ripe. I'm leaving you everything. You probably already know that if Harold did his job, and you're probably wondering why. Here's the truth. I never liked most of my family. Your father is a good man, but he's weak. He lets your mother run him, and he lets her run you, and he's never once stood up for you when it mattered. Your mother is a bully who hides behind good manners. Your brother is a parasite. Your sister is her mother's daughter. But you, Margaret, you're different. You don't see it. I know you don't. You've spent your whole life being told you're not enough, and you've believed it. but I've watched you. I've watched you for 30 years, and I know who you really are. You're kind without being weak. You're patient without being passive. You have a backbone. You just haven't learned how to use it yet. You're the only one who ever visited me just because you wanted to. The only one who sat on my porch and listened to my stories and actually cared about the answers. The only one who remembered my birthday without being reminded. The only one who saw me as a person, not a bank account. That's why I'm giving you everything. Not because you need it, though I suspect you do, because you deserve it, because you'll take care of it, because I trust you. Your family is going to try to take it from you. They'll guilt you. They'll manipulate you. They'll tell you you can't handle it, that you need their help, that it would be selfish to keep it all for yourself. Don't listen to them. You don't owe them anything, not one damn thing. Be brave, Margaret. Be the person I always knew you could be. I love you, Uncle Henry. I read the letter 4 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. I would read it again many times over the coming months, when I was scared, when I was doubting myself, when my family's voices got too loud in my head. It became my armor. But that first night, I didn't feel armored. I felt raw, exposed, like a snake that had just shed its skin and was still soft and vulnerable, waiting for the new layer to harden. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what I'd heard through that door. She can't say no to anything. She doesn't have the spine. The weak link, charity case, pathetic. 34 years of believing I wasn't good enough. 34 years of trying to earn a love that was never on offer. 34 years of giving and giving and giving, waiting for someone to give something back. And they thought I'd just hand it over. They'd already made plans. My mother had already talked to a lawyer. They were so sure of me, so sure that I would crumble, that I would need them, that I would be unable to say no. I wasn't angry. That's the strange part. I'd expected to be angry, furious even, but what I felt was something closer to clarity, like I'd been looking at a blurry picture my whole life, and someone had finally adjusted the focus. I saw my family clearly for the first time, and I understood what I had to do. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake. I hadn't slept at all. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, still in yesterday's funeral dress, staring at the wall. My mother's face appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring. She called again at 6:52, and 6:58, and 7:15. At 7:22 she texted, "Margaret, this is ridiculous. Call me back immediately. We need to discuss your uncle's estate." I didn't respond. At 8:03 my father called. I almost answered. His voice would be soft, apologetic. He'd say something like, "Your mother is worried," or "We just want to make sure you're okay." And I'd feel guilty the way I always felt guilty. And I'd call her back and the cycle would continue. I didn't answer. At 9:17 Sarah called, then Marcus, then Sarah again, then my mother again. By noon, I had 23 missed calls and 14 text messages. The texts ranged from concerned, "Are you okay? Please call us," to demanding, "This is unacceptable behavior, Margaret," to threatening, "If you don't respond in the next hour, we're coming over." At 12:34 someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole. It was Marcus. He was wearing a polo shirt and khakis, like he was on his way to a golf game. He knocked again, harder. "Margaret, I know you're in there. Open the door." I didn't move. "Come on, Mags, don't be like this. Mom's freaking out. Just let me in so we can talk." The old Margaret would have opened the door. The old Margaret would have apologized for worrying everyone, made excuses for her silence, let Marcus inside to talk, which really meant manipulate. The new Margaret, the one who had stood on the other side of a door and heard her family's true opinion of her, stayed silent. After 5 minutes, Marcus gave up. I heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway. I heard him on the phone with someone, his voice fading as he walked away. "She's not answering. I don't know. Maybe she's not home." I exhaled. Then I pulled out my laptop and started making plans. Harold Easton had given me his personal cell phone number. "Use it any time," he'd said, "day or night. I promised your uncle I'd take care of you, and I meant it." I called him that afternoon. "Miss Mitchell," he said, sounding pleased. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay." It was almost true. I need to ask you some questions. Of course, anything. My family is going to try to contest the will. My mother mentioned something about proving diminished capacity. Can they do that? Harold was quiet for a moment. They can try, but they won't succeed. How can you be sure? Because Henry anticipated this. His voice was gentle but firm. He knew his family. He knew what they would do. So 6 months ago, when he updated his will, he also underwent a comprehensive psychological evaluation, cognitive tests, interviews with 3 different psychiatrists, the works. The results were unequivocal. Your uncle was of completely sound mind. I have the documentation in my files, ready to be presented to any court that asks. I felt something loosen in my chest. He really planned for this. He did. He also, Harold paused. I'm not sure if I should tell you this. Tell me. He kept a journal, detailed records of every interaction he had with family members over the past 10 years. Every phone call that went unanswered, every visit that was canceled, every birthday that was forgotten, and every Sunday you spent with him on his porch, every story you asked him to tell again, every time you brought him homemade cookies or flowers from the farmer's market. I closed my eyes. I could see him so clearly, sitting in his worn leather chair, writing in one of those black and white composition notebooks he always used, recording everything, building a case. He wanted to protect you, Harold said. He knew they would come for you, so he made sure they couldn't win. Why didn't he just tell me? While he was alive, why didn't he warn me? I asked him that. Harold's voice was soft. He said he didn't want to burden you. He said you already carried enough. He wanted you to find out after he was gone, when you couldn't argue with him or try to give it away. That sounded like Uncle Henry, stubborn until the very end. What should I do? I asked. About my family, I mean. They're going to come after me. You have options. You could engage with them directly, explain that the will is airtight, that contesting it would be expensive and pointless. Or you could let them try to contest it and let the courts handle it. He paused. You could simply not engage at all. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe them anything. Uncle Henry's words, Harold's words. Maybe they were right. I need some time, I said, to figure out what I want to do. Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready. I took 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of not answering calls or texts, or the increasingly frantic knocks on my door. 3 days of sitting in my apartment, reading and rereading Uncle Henry's letter, trying to figure out who I wanted to be. The old Margaret would have caved by now. She would have been drowning in guilt, convinced that she was being cruel, that she was hurting people who loved her, that she owed it to her family to let them in. But I kept hearing their voices through that door. Weak link, charity case. She can't say no to anything. They didn't love me. They never had. They loved what I could give them, my time, my money, my apartment, my unquestioning support. They loved the version of me that made their lives easier, the real me, the person underneath all that giving. They'd never bothered to meet her. On the 4th day, I made a decision. I called Harold. I want to visit the properties, both farms, the house in Los Angeles. Can you arrange that? Of course. When would you like to go? Tomorrow. There was a smile in his voice. I'll make the arrangements. The Bakersfield farm was beautiful. I don't know what I expected. Something run down maybe, neglected. But what I found was a thriving operation. 200 acres of almond trees in neat rows, a modest farmhouse that had been recently painted white, a barn full of equipment that hummed with purpose. The foreman was a man named Roberto Vasquez. He'd worked for Uncle Henry for 32 years. You're Margaret, he said when I stepped out of the rental car. It wasn't a question. Yes. He studied me for a long moment. His face was weathered, brown, and lined from decades in the sun, but his eyes were sharp. Henry talked about you all the time, said you were the only one worth anything in that whole family. I didn't know what to say to that. He was a good man, Roberto continued. Fair, honest, worked alongside us every harvest until he got too old. Even then, he'd come out and supervise, make sure we were doing it right. He paused. What are you planning to do with this place? I looked out at the almond trees, rows and rows of them, stretching toward the horizon. The air smelled like earth and something sweet. I don't know yet, I admitted. I need to understand it first. Roberto nodded slowly. Good answer. He spent the next 4 hours showing me everything. The irrigation system that Uncle Henry had upgraded 5 years ago, the processing facility where the almonds were sorted and packaged, the workers' quarters, small but clean, with a communal kitchen and a garden out back. He treated us like family, Roberto said. Paid us fair wages, gave us health insurance, even when it wasn't required. Threw a party every Christmas, bought presents for all the kids. He looked at me directly. I hope you'll do the same. I will, I said. And I meant it. The Fresno farm was different. Smaller, just over 200 acres, but more diverse. Grapes, mostly, but also peaches and figs, and a small olive grove in the back corner. The foreman there was a woman named Elena Ortiz, and she had the same sharp eyes as Roberto, the same cautious hope. Henry said you'd come eventually, she told me. He said to tell you something. What? He said to tell you, the vines know when someone cares about them. They'll teach you everything you need to know if you're willing to learn. I ran my hand along a grapevine. The leaves were green and healthy, the fruit just starting to form. Did he come here often? Once a month at least, more during harvest. He'd walk every row, touch every vine, said it was how he stayed connected. Elena's voice softened. He loved this land. It wasn't just an investment to him. It was his life's work. What kind of man was he? I asked. When he was here, I mean. Not at family dinners, not in the stories he told me. Who was he when he was working? Elena considered the question. Demanding, fair, funny when you got to know him. He knew everyone's name, every worker's wife, every worker's child. He remembered things, birthdays, anniversaries, health problems. He'd ask about your grandmother's hip surgery or your son's soccer game, and you knew he actually cared about the answer. She walked me through the olive grove. The trees were old, 50 years at least, with gnarled trunks and silvery leaves. He planted these himself, Elena said. Back in the 70s, when everyone told him olives wouldn't grow here, he did it anyway, proved them wrong. I touched one of the trunks. The bark was rough under my fingers. He was stubborn, I said. Very, Elena smiled. But in a good way. The kind of stubborn that makes things happen. The mansion in Los Angeles was the hardest to see. Not because it was unpleasant, it was stunning. A sprawling Mediterranean-style house in Hancock Park, with terracotta tiles and wrought iron balconies, and a garden full of bougainvillea. It had been built in 1925, the real estate agent told me. 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a library, a pool, and a guest house in the back. It was hard because it was so clearly a home. Uncle Henry had lived there for 40 years. His furniture was still there, the worn leather chair where he'd sat every evening, the bookshelves filled with dog-eared paperbacks, the dining room table where he'd hosted holidays that nobody came to. I found his bedroom on the 2nd floor. The bed was made. On the nightstand was a photograph in a silver frame, a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes wearing a traditional Korean dress. The woman from Busan, the one he'd almost married. I picked up the frame and studied her face. She was beautiful, and there was something in her expression, a joy, a lightness, that made me understand why he'd never forgotten her. He kept that photo his whole life, the real estate agent said from the doorway. The previous cleaning lady told me he'd talk to it sometimes. Tell her about his day. I set the photo back down. I'm not selling this house, I said. The agent blinked. You're not? No, I looked around the room, at the books, the photographs, the evidence of a life well lived. This was his home. It's going to be my home now. I moved in 2 weeks later. I quit both my jobs. I gave up my apartment. I packed everything I owned into 3 suitcases and drove to Hancock Park and walked through the front door of the house that was somehow, impossibly, mine. It was terrifying. It was also the bravest thing I'd ever done. The first night, I slept in the guest room. Uncle Henry's bedroom felt too sacred, too full of his presence. I wasn't ready to claim it. But I walked through every room of the house before bed, turning on lights, opening windows, letting the evening air flow through. In the library, I found a wall of journals, hundreds of them. Uncle Henry's neat handwriting on every page, documenting decades of thoughts and observations and memories. I pulled one at random, It was from 1987. March 14th. Margaret came to visit today. She's only 8, but she sat on the porch with me for 3 hours, listening to stories about the war. Didn't fidget once, didn't ask to watch TV or play video games, just listened. When I asked if she was bored, she said, "No, Uncle Henry, I like your stories. They're like time travel." She might be the best person in this whole family. I sat down on the library floor, my back against the bookshelves, and I read. Entry after entry, year after year, my whole life, documented through Uncle Henry's eyes. June 22nd, 1995. Margaret graduated from high school today. She was 6th in her class, not valedictorian, but close. Her parents didn't seem to notice. They spent the whole party talking about Marcus's acceptance to Berkeley. Margaret stood in the corner, looking like she wanted to disappear. I made sure to tell her how proud I was. She almost cried. December 25th, 2001. Margaret came alone for Christmas, said her family was going skiing in Aspen, but she didn't want to be a burden. She brought me homemade cookies and we watched old movies all day. I don't think anyone has ever brought me homemade cookies before. I told her she was my favorite person in the world. She laughed like she didn't believe me. She should believe me. August 3rd, 2009. Margaret called today. She sounded defeated. Said David ended the engagement. I asked if she wanted to talk about it. She said she was fine. She wasn't fine. I could hear it in her voice. But I didn't push. She's not ready to talk yet. She will be someday. I'll be here when she is. November 17th, 2023. Updated my will today. Left everything to Margaret. Harold asked if I was sure. I told him I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That girl has more strength than she knows. She just needs someone to believe in her. I'm going to be that someone, even after I'm gone. I closed the journal. I sat in the dark library, surrounded by the evidence of a man who had loved me unconditionally, and I finally let myself believe it. My family found out about the house 2 days later. I don't know how. Probably the real estate agent, or someone at the title company. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Sarah showed up on my doorstep at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, her face a perfect mask of concerned sisterly love. Margaret, she was using her soft voice, the one she deployed when she wanted something. We've been so worried about you. You haven't returned anyone's calls. We didn't know where you were. I'm fine, I said. I didn't invite her in. I can see that. Her eyes moved past me, taking in the foyer, the staircase, the crystal chandelier. This is quite a place. It was Uncle Henry's. I know. She was still smiling, but it was getting harder to maintain. Mom said you inherited everything. We couldn't believe it. It's so unexpected. It wasn't unexpected to Uncle Henry. Sarah's smile flickered. Right, well, the thing is, Margaret, we're a little concerned. This is a lot of responsibility. A mansion, 2 farms. That's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone who's never… She stopped herself. Someone who's never what? I just mean you don't have experience with this kind of thing. Managing properties, making financial decisions. It would be totally understandable if you wanted some help. From you? From family. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was cold. We love you, Margaret. We want to support you through this. That's all. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Maybe for the first time in years. Sarah was 41. She had laugh lines around her eyes and a few strands of gray in her perfectly highlighted hair. She was wearing a Chanel suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. And she was lying. It was so obvious. How had I never seen it before? I appreciate your concern, I said, but I don't need any help. Her smile tightened. Margaret, be reasonable. You can't possibly… I said no. Sarah blinked. For a moment, something raw flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or frustration. Then her mask was back in place. Fine, if that's how you want to be. But Mom's going to call you, and Marcus, they have concerns about Uncle Henry's mental state when he made the will. I'm aware. You should know that if you refuse to cooperate with us, we'll have no choice but to… Contest the will? I finished. Go ahead. Harold Easton has documentation of Uncle Henry's psychological evaluations. 3 different psychiatrists confirmed he was of sound mind. Also kept detailed journals documenting every interaction he had with family members over the past decade. Every forgotten birthday, every canceled visit. Every Sunday I spent on his porch while the rest of you couldn't be bothered. I paused. How do you think that will play in court? Sarah went pale. Goodbye, Sarah. I closed the door in her face. The next few weeks were exhausting. My mother called, my father called, Marcus called, then texted, then showed up drunk on my doorstep at midnight demanding to be let in. I didn't engage with any of them. I simply stopped responding. They hired a lawyer, the friend of Carol's husband my mother had mentioned. He sent an official letter threatening to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Harold sent back a response attaching Uncle Henry's psychiatric evaluations and a summary of the journal evidence. We never heard from that lawyer again. They tried other tactics. My mother sent flying monkeys, relatives I barely knew, family friends who called just to check in, and then casually suggested I should think about what Uncle Henry would have really wanted. I was polite but firm with all of them. No, I didn't need advice. No, I wasn't being controlled by anyone. Yes, I understood what I was doing. One evening, about a month after I'd moved into the house, my father came alone. He stood on the doorstep, looking smaller than I remembered. He was 68 years old, and he suddenly looked every year of it. Can I come in? He asked. Just to talk, I promise. I hesitated. My father had never been the problem exactly. He'd just never been the solution. He'd stood by and watched while my mother and siblings treated me like an afterthought, and he'd never once intervened. But he was my father, and he looked tired. Okay, I said, but just to talk. We sat in the living room. I offered him tea. He declined. He looked around at the furniture, the bookshelves, the photographs on the mantel. It looks just like it did when Henry was alive, he said. I haven't changed much. No. He was quiet for a moment. I used to come here, when I was young. My mother would bring me on Sundays. Henry would take me out to the garden and show me how to plant things. He was patient with me, more patient than my own father ever was. I didn't say anything. I should have visited him more, my father continued. In his later years, I always meant to, but there was always something. Your mother had plans, or the kids needed something, or I was tired from work. He shook his head. Excuses, that's all they were. Why are you telling me this? He finally looked at me. His eyes were wet. Because I failed him, he said. I failed him, and I failed you. And I don't know how to fix it. I waited. Your mother wants you to share the inheritance. She thinks you're being selfish. She thinks you're betraying the family by keeping it all for yourself. He paused. I told her she was wrong. You did? I did, he rubbed his eyes. Henry left everything to you for a reason. He didn't owe us anything. We never gave him anything worth having. And neither did we give you anything worth having. All these years, I watched your mother and your siblings treat you like you were less than them, and I never said a word. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself it wasn't my place. His voice broke. I was a coward. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it. I'm not going to share the inheritance, I said quietly. I'm not doing that to spite anyone. I'm doing it because Uncle Henry wanted me to have it. He trusted me to take care of what he built. And I'm going to honor that. My father nodded slowly. I know. But I don't hate you. I don't hate any of you, really. I'm just done. Done trying to earn love from people who don't have it to give. Done pretending that being family means letting people hurt you. My father was silent for a long moment. I understand, he finally said. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, for becoming the person Henry always knew you could be. He stood slowly, like his bones ached. If you ever need anything at all, I'm here. Not as your mother's husband, not as part of that family, just as someone who should have done better. I walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold. Margaret? Yes? The farms, the house, this whole inheritance. He gestured vaguely at the walls around us. It's not really about the money, is it? I thought about Uncle Henry's letter, about his journals, about the years of Sundays on his porch, listening to stories, being seen. No, I said, it's not about the money. It's about being loved, really loved, for once in my life. My father's face crumpled. He turned away quickly, but not before I saw the tears. Goodbye, Margaret. Goodbye, Dad. I closed the door gently behind him. The months passed. I learned to run a farm. 2 farms, actually. Roberto and Elena became my teachers, my advisors, my friends. They taught me about soil composition and irrigation schedules and the delicate art of knowing when to harvest. I walked the rows of almond trees and grapevines, just like Uncle Henry used to, touching leaves and checking for pests and listening to the land. I learned to live in a mansion. That sounds ridiculous. How hard can it be to live in a house? But it was harder than you'd think. The space was overwhelming at first. I'd spent so many years in cramped apartments that I didn't know what to do with all those rooms. But slowly I made it mine. I turned one of the spare bedrooms into an office. I set up a reading nook in the library. I planted tomatoes in the garden the same way Uncle Henry had for 60 years. I learned to be alone. Not lonely, that's different. I'd been lonely my whole life, even when I was surrounded by family. This was something else. This was solitude, chosen and purposeful. I went days without talking to anyone, except the people who worked on the farms, and that was fine, more than fine. It was peaceful. I read all of Uncle Henry's journals, every single one. It took me 3 months. I learned things about him I'd never known, about his childhood in California, about his military service, about the woman in Busan who had broken his heart. I learned that he'd been engaged once, to an American woman named Grace, but she died in a car accident 6 months before the wedding. He'd never recovered. He'd never even tried to love anyone else. Except me, that's what the journals made clear. Uncle Henry had poured all his capacity for love into me, into watching me grow, into believing in me when no one else did, into preparing for a future he wouldn't live to see. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. A year after the funeral, I got a letter from my mother. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope, neat, precise, the careful script of a woman who believed that penmanship reflected character. I almost didn't open it, but I did. Dear Margaret, it's been a year since we've spoken. I've had time to think. You've made your position very clear, and I want you to know that I understand it. I may not agree with it, but I understand it. You believe we treated you poorly. Perhaps we did. Perhaps I did. I'm willing to accept that possibility. But I also want you to understand my perspective. I was trying to protect you. You've always been sensitive, easily hurt. I worried that too much attention, too much pressure, would crush you, so I held back. Perhaps I held back too much. I never meant to make you feel invisible. I never meant to treat you as less than your siblings. If that's how it seemed, I'm sorry. I would like to repair our relationship, not for the money I've accepted that the inheritance is yours, and I won't contest it any further. But because you're my daughter, and I love you, and the silence between us hurts more than I expected it would. Please call me. Please let me try to make things right. Your mother. I read the letter twice. Then I set it aside and went out to the garden. The tomatoes were ripe. I picked 3 of them, feeling the weight in my palm, smelling that sharp green scent that always reminded me of summer afternoons on Uncle Henry's porch. I thought about my mother's letter, about her apology, which was more of an explanation, about her love, which was conditional on my acceptance of her narrative. She hadn't apologized for calling me weak. She hadn't apologized for planning to have Uncle Henry declared mentally incompetent. She hadn't apologized for the years and years of small cruelties that had accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. She'd apologized for holding back too much, as if the problem was that she'd loved me too carefully, too gently, too protectively. I stood in the garden with tomatoes in my hands, and I felt a familiar pull. The pull to respond, to engage, to give her another chance, to be the good daughter, the forgiving daughter, the daughter who never held grudges, who always saw the best in people, who couldn't say no, but that daughter was gone. She died on the day of Uncle Henry's funeral, standing outside a door, listening to her family's plan. I went back inside. I sat down at the desk in my office, the desk that had been Uncle Henry's, still stacked with his papers, still smelling faintly of the leather conditioner he'd used, and I wrote a response. Mother, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your willingness to accept that things might have seemed different from my perspective. But they didn't seem a certain way. They were a certain way. For 34 years, I was treated as less than. Not because I was sensitive, but because I was convenient to overlook. I'm not angry with you anymore. Anger takes energy, and I'm choosing to spend my energy on other things. On running the farms, on taking care of this house, on building a life that makes me happy. But I'm also not interested in repairing our relationship. Not because I hate you, because I finally learned that some relationships can't be repaired. They can only be survived. I wish you well. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. But don't contact me again. I won't respond. Margaret. I sealed the envelope. I addressed it. I drove to the post office myself and put it in the mailbox. Then I drove home and made dinner and read a book and went to bed. I slept well that night. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 18 months after Uncle Henry's death, Harold Easton called me with news. Your family has filed a lawsuit, he said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. They're claiming fraud. They're saying Uncle Henry was deceived into leaving everything to you, that you manipulated him in his final years. I felt my stomach drop. That's ridiculous. Of course it is, but they found a lawyer willing to take the case. Someone with connections in the probate courts. What do? We fight it. Harold's voice hardened. We have the documentation, Margaret. We have the psychiatric evaluations, the journals, the testimony of people who knew Henry for decades. But I need to warn you, this is going to be public. They're going to drag your name through the mud. They're going to say terrible things about you and about Henry. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the tomatoes in my garden, about the almond trees in Bakersfield and the grapevines in Fresno, about the photograph of the woman from Busan on Uncle Henry's nightstand. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. The lawsuit lasted 8 months. 8 months of depositions and legal filings and newspaper articles and online commentary. 8 months of my family's lawyers trying to paint me as a manipulative gold digger who had preyed on a vulnerable old man. 8 months of strangers on the internet debating whether I deserved my inheritance or whether I was a monster. The worst part was the testimony. My mother took the stand and wept. She talked about how Uncle Henry had always been troubled and how I had taken advantage of his loneliness. She described me as quiet and calculating, always watching, always waiting for an opportunity. Sarah talked about how I'd isolated Uncle Henry from the rest of the family. She claimed I'd discouraged him from attending holidays, from calling other relatives, from connecting with anyone except me. Marcus was the most vicious. He called me a parasite. He said I'd been obsessed with Uncle Henry since childhood, always hovering around him, always seeking his attention because I couldn't get it from anyone else. He implied, without quite saying it, that my relationship with Uncle Henry was inappropriate. I sat in the courtroom and listened to all of it, and I didn't break. I thought I would. I thought hearing my family say these things about me, in public, under oath, recorded for posterity, would destroy me the way it would have destroyed the old Margaret. But something strange happened instead. I felt calm, because I knew the truth. I knew who I was. I knew who Uncle Henry was. And I knew that everything they were saying was a desperate, flailing attempt to take something that wasn't theirs. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth. I talked about the Sundays on Uncle Henry's porch. I talked about the stories he'd told me and the lessons he'd taught me. I talked about the letter he'd left me and the journals and the way he'd believed in me when no one else would. And then Harold introduced the journals into evidence. Entry after entry, year after year. Uncle Henry's clear, careful documentation of a family that had neglected him and a niece who had loved him. June 15, 2018. Called my nephew to wish him a happy birthday. He didn't answer. He never answers. Marcus answered once, 5 years ago, to ask if I'd consider helping with his business venture. I said no. He hasn't called since. September 3rd, 2019. Invited the family to Thanksgiving. They all declined. Work commitments, they said, school schedules, other plans. Margaret offered to come. She said she could bring homemade pie. She doesn't have to offer. She just does. April 22nd, 2021. Margaret drove 2 hours in the rain to bring me soup because I mentioned on the phone that I had a cold. 2 hours for soup. When I thanked her, she said, "That's what family does." She's the only one who means it. The courtroom was silent. I looked at my mother. Her face was pale, her makeup streaked with tears that suddenly seemed less convincing. I looked at Sarah, who was staring at her hands. I looked at Marcus, who was glaring at me with undisguised hatred. And I felt nothing, not anger, not Satisfaction, not even relief. Just a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We won. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. Uncle Henry had been of sound mind. The will was valid. There was no evidence of fraud, manipulation, or undue influence. The lawsuit was dismissed, and my family was ordered to pay my legal fees. Harold called me that evening to congratulate me. "You did it," he said. "You stood your ground, and you won. Henry would be proud." "Thank you," I said, "for everything. I was just doing my job." "No." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "You did more than your job. You protected me. You protected him. That matters." There was a pause. "You know," Harold said slowly, "in 40 years of practicing law, Henry was my favorite client. Not because he was easy, God knows he wasn't. Because he was real. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. And he never played games. You're the same way, Margaret. That's why he loved you." I didn't know what to say to that. "Take care of yourself," Harold said, "and take care of those farms. They're his legacy, and now they're yours." That was 2 years ago. I'm writing this from the library of the house in Hancock Park. My house now, though I still think of it as Uncle Henry's. The tomatoes in the garden are ripe, and later this afternoon I'm going to pick them and make sauce the way he taught me. Tomorrow I'm driving to Fresno to walk the grapevines with Elena. Next week I'm flying to Bakersfield for the almond harvest. I have a life now, a real life, not just an existence. I have people who care about me, Roberto and Elena and their families, Harold and his wife, the neighbors who've become friends over Sunday barbecues and holiday parties. I have purpose, managing the farms and continuing Uncle Henry's legacy of treating workers fairly and loving the land. I haven't spoken to my mother or siblings since the lawsuit ended. I don't know what they're doing, and I don't particularly care. My father sends me a card every Christmas, just a card, no request for money or favors. Just a brief note that says he's thinking of me. I send one back. It's not a relationship exactly, but it's something. Maybe it's enough. Sometimes I think about that girl I used to be, the one who couldn't say no, who let people walk all over her, who spent her whole life trying to earn love that was never on offer. I want to go back and hug her. I want to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that she was worthy of love all along, that someday she would find someone who saw her clearly and loved her completely. Uncle Henry saw her. Uncle Henry loved her. And in the end, that was enough. If you've read this far, you might be expecting some grand conclusion, some lesson about family or forgiveness, or the power of standing up for yourself. I don't have one. What I have is this: a house full of books and memories, 2 farms that are thriving, a photograph of a woman from Busan on my nightstand, next to a letter that I've read so many times I've memorized every word. What I have is a life that I built from the ashes of one I was given. What I have is the knowledge that Uncle Henry was right about me. I did have a backbone. I just needed someone to believe in me long enough for me to find it. I think about him every day. When I walk through the garden, when I pick tomatoes, when I sit in his leather chair and watch the sun set over Los Angeles. I talk to him sometimes, the way he used to talk to the photograph of the woman he loved. I tell him about the farms and the workers and the decisions I've made. I tell him about the life I'm building. I ask him questions I wish I'd asked when he was alive. He doesn't answer, of course, but sometimes, in the quiet moments, when the light is just right and the air smells like growing things, I swear I can feel him, not a ghost, not a presence, just a warmth, a certainty, a sense that somewhere, somehow, he knows, and that he's proud. I came home from the funeral with a secret inheritance. I stood outside a door and heard my family's plan. And instead of walking through that door, instead of giving them what they expected, I turned around and walked away. That was the bravest thing I ever did. Not inheriting the money, not winning the lawsuit, not standing up for myself in a courtroom full of people who wanted me to fail. Walking away, choosing myself. Finally, after 34 years, believing that I was worth choosing. That's the story. Not a story about revenge or justice or making people pay for how they treated me. A story about a woman who was invisible her whole life until one person saw her clearly enough to change everything. Uncle Henry gave me more than farms and a mansion. He gave me myself. And that's worth more than $18 million could ever be. The tomatoes are ripe. I should go pick them.